premiers are getting together soon to discuss the issue of equalization. And Saskatchewan's Premier Brad Wall, who you remember a couple of weeks ago talked about if equalization were sent in a pipeline, there might be a broader embracing of pipelines by Central Canada. The Premier is going to be talking about perhaps doing equalization differently. Now, we've gotten wind of this, and we find Premier Brad Wall in Swift Current this morning. Thought we would find out more about what he is thinking about at this point on the equalization formula for Canada. Mr. Premier, thanks for taking our call.
Good morning, John.
Walk me through what the timeline is here. Do you redo equalization every year?
No, it hasn't been readjusted for some time, and some elements of it can be done unilaterally by the federal government, including a cap that they've placed on equalization so that it can't grow sort of beyond the rate of the economy. And with now Ontario as a recipient at about $2 billion, that's sort of reducing the existing pot for provinces where it's easier probably to make the case that they're going to need help in Atlantic Canada. So, no, not real. There's not regular changes to the program. And that means we're stuck with some problems in the program. We really are. By the way, let me say as a proviso, Saskatchewan's grateful to have been a recipient province in the past. We have no indication and no inclination to ever be a recipient province in the future. Even with oil, with the way prices the way they are, our economy is comparatively strong and diversified, and there's just not a chance that we're going to be heading back that way anytime soon, nor should we want to. However, there are some sort of systemic structural problems that have existed a long time with equalization. For example, oil and gas gets counted with respect to a province's eligibility. Hydro still doesn't. And so those provinces that have a lot of hydro, Manitoba, Quebec, for example, that's completely excluded from the calculation. And increasingly, of course, that's a pretty valuable resource. So that's one problem. Here's another one. There is a lag, about a 3 to 5 year lag in the calculation. So, for example, Saskatchewan people who contribute about $500 million a year to this federal program, and Albertans who contribute $2 billion a year to the federal program, even though oil prices are very low right now, will do so for the next 3 to 5 years. You know, I think that's a bit of a problem. It's not reflective of the facts in terms of oil and gas prices. So, you know, there's a couple of examples of problems with the program that we're likely to identify. It's a federal election, and although it's not talked about much, I probably should be, especially given the length of the campaign.
Good point. Yeah, it's not like they don't have time to talk about things.
That's right.
Okay, so if you've got the characterization of what's exempted, what's included, you've got the lag. What about the overall commitment of $17 billion in a year? Is that a suitable amount of money?
Well, I would argue no. And, you know, the equalization is basically constitutionally protected. This is something that would be hard to eliminate. We're some interested in doing that, but I think there's a case to be made for its reduction. For example, and again, let's remember the numbers here. Saskatchewan people this year will put in about $500 million into equalization, and Albertans $2 billion, even with oil at I think $46 this morning. And those provinces that benefit from low oil prices through the attendant reduction in the dollar, with major manufacturing sectors, by the way, sort of have this leg in place for them to 3 to 5 years. Maybe we should do something different. Maybe we could cut the program in half and use the other half for national infrastructure, or perhaps a combination of national infrastructure and sustainable tax reductions that would benefit every Canadian. I think every premier has a long list of infrastructure projects they'd like to get done. So do our municipalities. I mean, we know there's lots more work to be done in our highways. You could put together an outstanding annual $8.5 billion infrastructure program if you said, look, we're not going to play this equalization game anymore, but we're going to have the federal government use these dollars to replace and renew Canada's infrastructure, or to reduce taxes for Canadians and strengthen the economy. Those are a couple of ideas we may suggest.
Now, have you floated those ideas in the past, past any of your colleagues around the Premier's table?
We had a very sort of glancing discussion of equalization in Newfoundland. We were talking about other things, and as you might recall. And so, I mean, I did mention there at the table that there's this lag, and it's unfair to Western Canadians. It's got to be dealt with. In the past, we've certainly raised the hydro position. Our hydro position, of course, is that it ought to be included in the formula. Manitoba's, not in favor of that. Neither is Quebec. But this notion that maybe equalization should be reduced, focused on the regions that are, that don't have the critical mass. In Atlantic Canada, for example, historically reliant on some help from the program, and use the rest of it for equalization or some economic measures that we know will help to strengthen and build the Canadian economy. We have not raised yet, but this is the direction that we think we'd like to go. We think it's also reflective of what Saskatchewan people would support, which is, yes, we should be part of equalization. We should be helping where we can. We benefited from the program in the past, but we ought to fix the program, and maybe we ought to refocus it to priorities like infrastructure, for example.
Premier Brad Wall with us on thinking out loud on some proposed changes to the National Equalization Program. Okay, so you're talking, again, at this preliminary point, where do you then go to advance this, or at least get some national agenda-based discussion?
Well, today we're talking about it in the media, obviously, on your show. I think we'll raise it again on another show we've been invited on in Alberta. This is an opportunity perhaps for us to engage with all the federal leaders. Like I said off the top, we are in this interminable federal election now until October. And it's amazing if you consider the last number of federal elections, consider how many times equalization was raised. It's a $17 billion federal program, as you mentioned off the top. And I don't remember it ever coming up at a campaign. The reason is that it's controversial. It's incendiary. Regions of the country feel very passionately that there ought to be no change. And if there is to be a change, it should simply just be more money into the program. But now is probably the time, I think, as good as any in the course of a federal election, at the very beginning of a long one, to say, can we even have this discussion? Is this program very efficient? Why is hydro not included? Why this lag for Western Canadians? And can a big chunk of this be better used? So I think this is the right time for that talk.
Premier, good getting caught up. Thanks for this.
Thanks, John. Take care.
Brad Wall, Premier of Saskatchewan.